Chapter 19, Data Communication. Section 19.1, What is data communication? Well, this is an easy question to answer. Data communication is the communication of data. Okay, we can add some nuance here. You put a lot of time and effort into collecting, processing, visualizing, and analyzing data. Why did you do it? Perhaps you did it only for your own personal edification, but in most cases you analyze data to communicate findings to an audience. Perhaps your audience is a teacher, boss, colleagues, scientific community, clients, Twitter followers, or government agency. Data are often complicated and confusing and must be presented in a way that allows your audience to understand and appreciate the importance and implications of your findings. Therefore, data communication is the process of presenting your data and results in a way that others can understand and use to guide data-based decisions. There is no simple recipe that you can follow to guarantee effective data communication. Data communication is a skill, an art really, that you improve with practice, effort, and feedback. The goal of this chapter is to provide some context and guidance to help you craft your bespoke data communication. Perhaps you find it frustrating that after all the effort you put into cleaning and analyzing data in a rigorous and transparent way, you need to put in additional effort to make your data understood by others. Here's an analogy that ChatGPT suggested. Quote, "It's like baking a delicious cake from scratch. After spending hours on the perfect recipe and baking, you still have to take the time to ice and decorate the cake so that it's not just tasty, but also visually appealing to those who will eat it." End quote. Footnote. Further clarification from ChatGPT. Quote, "The aim of this analogy is to emphasize that while the bulk of the work might be done, the final touches, though they might seem minor, are crucial for the entire effort to be recognized and appreciated by others." End quote. End footnote. Section 19.2, Tell a story by crafting a data narrative. Stories are captivating, powerful, and memorable. Every human culture has used stories to communicate ideas, findings, and wisdom, to tell people where they came from and where they are going, and to give advice about life, love, and death. But data are not stories. Data are collections of numbers that most people find esoteric, hard to understand, and hard to remember. Therefore, successful data communication requires a story about the data. That story, or narrative, provides context and meaning to the data. It allows people to understand the relevance and importance of the data. Section 19.2.1, What is a data narrative? A data narrative is a thoughtful way of presenting your data in a way that makes it interesting and memorable. It's not a way to hide your data behind hand-wavy excuses. Instead, it is a way to reveal the key patterns and nuances in your data in a way that captures attention and sparks interest. Consider the following examples. Many people are more afraid of being a passenger in an airplane than in a car, and yet fatal car accidents are much more likely than fatal airplane accidents. Many people are more afraid of terrorists than of junk food, and yet the risk of dying from preventable heart disease is much higher than the risk of dying from a terrorist attack. People vote against their interests, make poor financial investments, pay for extended warranties on TVs, and trust social media posts written by unknown actors over highly trained scientists and medical doctors. Why do people make choices that are inconsistent with data? Of course, there is a longer discussion to be had about the balance between rational and emotion-driven decisions, a discussion that I will avoid because entire books are dedicated to the topic. But part of the reason is that compelling narratives can overpower dry or complicated data presentations. This is not a chapter on how to convince people to make better life choices for their lives and their communities, but these examples highlight the necessity to weave your statistical results into a narrative to communicate your findings. I do not believe that there is one single general formula for presenting your data as a narrative. Each experiment and each dataset has a unique story to tell. I have two goals for this chapter. One, to make you aware of the importance of a narrative in data communication, and two, to provide a few general tips that I have found useful. Section 19.3, A Few Tips. Section 19.3.1, Generate and Resolve Conflict. This is my most important tip. Identify a conflict and then use data to resolve it. Conflict is in the nature of human beings. We all have conflict. Conflicts at work, conflicts at home, conflicts between priorities, and conflicts between nations. Major conflicts can lead to suffering or death and should be avoided when possible. But even a disagreement about what to eat for lunch can be seen as a minor form of conflict. Small conflicts are an important part of how we make progress in our lives, our work, and our relationships, because as much as conflict is part of human nature, our desire to resolve conflict is even stronger. In fact, resolving conflict is the entire idea behind scientific research. People disagree about how the world works, that is, conflict, and scientists conduct experiments and gather data in order to resolve the conflict. In other words, data provide a way to resolve conflicts. You can present the conflict as a competition between two mutually exclusive hypotheses, or you can present the conflict as uncertainty for which the data will provide clarity. In fact, you can interpret the H0 and HA as a conflict between competing hypotheses about an unknown population characteristic. The outcome of the statistical analysis provides quantitative measures that help you resolve the conflict about which state of the world is more likely given the data. Resolution is not guaranteed. Don't take this advice too far. You are not scripting a Hollywood movie that needs a happy ending wrapped up in a nice, easily digestible package. Instead, you are constructing a narrative to help your audience interpret and understand the data. The data are of primary importance and should not be hidden, manipulated, or ignored simply because it would be inconvenient to the narrative. It's okay if the data do not perfectly resolve the conflict. In fact, it often happens that the data are insufficiently decisive to resolve a conflict. Experiments are rarely perfect, statistical flukes and mistakes can happen, and replications are crucial to progress in science. Indeed, the main conclusion of your research might be that more data and experiments are required to fully resolve the conflict. That's like the cliffhanger at the end of a movie that baits the audience for the sequel. Again, the point is that the narrative helps you present the data. Don't contort the data to support a preconceived narrative. Section 19.3.2, Humanize Previous Research. Research does not simply exist. It is created by humans with considerable time and effort. Even if a researcher spends only a few months conducting an experiment, analyzing the data, and reporting the results, there are decades or maybe centuries of developments in technology and theory that created the environment in which that researcher could complete a study in mere months. The long and rich history that leads to each finding is part of a data narrative. Thus, when motivating your study, discuss previous research in a historical way. Consider the following two paragraphs. Paragraph 1. Quote, developments in mobile technology in the 1980s led to research from Smith et al. 1983, who showed that ... which in turn inspired other groups, notably including McKenzie and colleagues 1990, to follow up by expanding the research into ... end quote. Paragraph 2. Quote, Smith et al. 1983 showed ... Then McKenzie et al. 1990 showed ... End quote. I think you agree that with option 1, your audience will be much more interested in learning about your findings and how they fit into the evolution of knowledge. But with option 2, your audience may struggle to keep their interest amidst a dry list of findings without context. Also, be kind to other researchers. Not all research is high quality, but researchers have good intentions. If the research was poorly done, you could be critical without resorting to ad hominem attacks. For example, by pointing out that previous findings need to be questioned and replicated because of advances in measurement, experiment design, and data analysis methods. It is important for the development of science and human civilization that scientists are critical of each other's work, but that doesn't mean that imperfections or mistakes are due to maliciousness or idiocy. Here's the way I see it. There's a game between us humans and nature. Nature tries to keep everything hidden and mysterious, and we try to uncover her secrets. We are all on the same team, and we're all working towards the same goal. It is crucial that we critically assess each other's work, but it's equally important to remember that critiques should be about the work itself, not about the researchers. Personal attacks do not help in our shared mission. Friendly competition is good because it helps us do better, but we should be rooting for and helping each other against our common enemy, which is the mysterious secrecy of nature. Section 19.3.3 Highlight the importance of your findings. Okay, maybe you're not curing cancer or solving humanity's energy crisis, but expanding the boundaries of human knowledge is one of the most important drivers of progress and prosperity in human civilization, and each new iota of data increases the sum total of human knowledge. But your audience won't necessarily know why your findings are important or what gap in knowledge your findings help to fill. When motivating your experiment or summarizing your results, use phrases like, quote, this is important because, end quote, or, quote, this is relevant because, end quote, or, quote, these findings contribute to our understanding of, end quote. Section 19.3.4 Various tips for writing a results section. This section contains some tips to keep in mind when describing your results in text, for example, in the results section of a scientific article. Organize findings by paragraph. Organize your findings into groups of related analyses using one paragraph per group of findings. Each paragraph should open with an introduction and justification. For example, quote, in the next set of analyses, we examined whether variables x and y were related to z, end quote. You can also incorporate a data narrative into each paragraph or subsection. For example, quote, we were concerned that the finding might be due to a confound of ... Therefore, in the next set of analyses, we sought to examine whether ... end quote. If the paragraph contains multiple findings or is long, consider closing the paragraph with a summary statement, such as, quote, taken together, these findings show that ... end quote. Put numerical results into a table. If you find that your text contains many numbers, such as means, standard deviations, confidence intervals, f-values, degrees of freedom, p-values, and so on, then consider putting the numbers into a table and providing a written description of the key findings. Too many numbers embedded in the text can make the passage difficult to read. Use the active voice. Take credit for your efforts. Statistics are not performed on data passively, but instead are done by trained humans, including you. For example, write, quote, "We next performed a 2x3 ANOVA," end quote, instead of, quote, "A 2x3 ANOVA was conducted," end quote. Use a clear and ambiguous tone. Maintain a professional, serious, and clear tone in writing. You might be tempted to incorporate analogies, cultural references, colloquial expressions, or even humor, but please resist these temptations. Such elements can enhance oral presentations when used judiciously by helping to engage your audience and make your findings memorable. However, in technical scientific documents, these elements can increase the risk of misunderstandings. The written word lacks the immediate feedback of an audience, the tone of voice, and body language that can provide context in oral communication. Thus, prioritize clarity and directness in your writing to ensure that your message is understood as intended. Footnote: I package a few jokes into my books, but never in my scientific publications, and I try to make the jokes inconsequential to the important messages. End footnote. Section 19.3.5, How much to report? In simple experiments, there is one hypothesis to test and one main statistical result to report. In this case, you can report all the analyses that were performed. But these kinds of studies are increasingly rare. Experiments generally become more complicated over time as the basic findings are established, and data sets generally become richer over time as measurement techniques allow for more and better data to be acquired simultaneously. In other words, modern data sets tend to be larger and more multidimensional than their older counterparts. This means that there are more opportunities for hypothesis testing and data exploration, which increases the number of analyses performed. Therefore, in practice, you might conduct more analyses than you report. There's a balance between reporting your data explorations honestly and presenting a coherent narrative that someone can follow and remember. At one extreme, if you were to detail every single interaction you had with your data, for example, including finding and fixing coding bugs and rerunning visualization code to adjust the line thickness or colors, your manuscript would be hundreds of pages long and no one would read it. On the other extreme, conducting dozens of statistical analyses and only reporting the one that best supports your hypothesis is unethical. You will need to use your judgment and integrity to decide what and how much detail to report. My advice is that if you tried several different analyses that led to the same conclusion, report one analysis in detail and briefly mention the other analyses you tried. On the other hand, if different analyses led to different conclusions, report those analyses in detail, discuss possible reasons for the differences, and use caution when interpreting the results. Section 19.4, Outlets for publishing data. Where to present your findings depends on the situation. For example, companies that conduct research in-house may want the findings to be presented as summaries or technical reports used internally. Indeed, if the data are used to guide strategic business decisions, the findings may be considered proprietary and private. In academic spheres, the most common outlet for data communication is peer-reviewed academic journals. Peer review means that the other scientists who have some expertise in the topic, experimental techniques, or statistical methods, read and evaluate the submitted manuscript before it can be published. A typical review process involves 2 to 3 reviewers who make suggestions for the authors to include in a revision, and the whole process from initial submission to final publication may take up to a year. There are also non-peer-reviewed online archives where authors can submit their manuscripts to make them immediately available without peer review process. Posting online without or before formal review does not indicate low quality. It enables rapid, low barrier, and low cost communication of science. 2 popular archives are archive.org and bioarchive.org. Results from statistical analyses can also be communicated on personal or company websites, government documents, and social media. Findings can be communicated orally, for example, at conference presentations. However, oral-only presentations are less suitable for durable communication because of the limited audience and risk that they will forget the findings. The reason why I'd mention this diversity of scientific outlets is that they impact your data narrative. If your study will be written up as a technical document only to be used by your coworkers who are also experts, then you probably don't need to focus on the narrative and can dive right into the details. On the other hand, if you write a publication for a diverse audience that includes people outside your field, then you will need to spend a lot more time and energy crafting a data narrative that balances a simple and memorable story with the reality and nuances of your findings. End of chapter 19. That's also the end of this book. Thank you kindly for listening to the audio version of this book.